Hello everyone, I'm Kohsen Handa from the Noosology Research Institute at Musashino Gakuin University. Today, I'm pleased to present the second research video in this series. In our last session, I briefly discussed the connection between Anaxagoras' concept of Nous and Noosology. This time, I'd like to delve a bit deeper into the meaning behind the term Nous, which has also been translated as divine intelligence or active intelligence. I'll approach this topic with a higher level of detail, incorporating the philosophies of Plato and Heidegger. The title of today's presentation is Heidegger as mediator between Plato and Aristotle, and Noosology as its transcendence. Bit lengthy, but I believe it will do just fine. Thank you for joining me, and let's get started. As I mentioned in the previous video, Heidegger harshly criticized Socrates for transforming the philosophy of physics into a philosophy of subjectivity by introducing human values such as goodness and justice. That said, the Greeks did not entirely forget this line of thought centered on Nous, which sought to reclaim physics. Although not mentioned clearly, Nous continued to appear under various names throughout the lineage of Western philosophy, from Plato and Aristotle onward, as if it were a legacy left behind by the now absent physics, leaving traces throughout the history of philosophy. In any case, philosophy as a discipline has been cursed, so to speak, by this ancient Greek question of how did nature begin? And I think it's fair to say that Plato was the one who solidified this curse. Plato is, of course, a famous figure. The history of Western philosophy is essentially just an extensive commentary on Plato. This is a quote from one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, Alfred North Whitehead. Without Plato, it will be impossible to discuss the history of Western philosophy. When we think of Plato, the first thing that probably comes to mind is his theory of ideas, or theory of forms. Simply put, this theory envisions the world as divided into two realms, such as heaven and earth. Human consciousness recognizes two types of worlds: the sensory world, which is perceived through the five senses, and the metaphysical world, which can only be grasped through abstract concepts like numbers and geometry. Plato separated these two worlds, seeing one as the realm of phenomena, constantly changing and impermanent, and the other as the realm of ideas, where eternal and unchanging truths reside, thus spiriting the worlds of existence into. In his work, The Republic, Plato explains the relationship between the world of phenomena and the world of ideas through the famous allegory of the cave. This is quite well known, isn't it? This allegory can be seen as capturing the essence of Platonic philosophy. And considering its enduring influence, it might be one of the most significant texts Plato left for future generations. For instance, the science fiction masterpiece by the Wachowski sisters, The Matrix. That was the movie which was inspired by this Plato's Allegory of the Cave. Though many of you are probably familiar with this, let me briefly introduce it once again here. Now, imagine prisoners bound with ropes, seated facing the wall at the back of the cave. Behind them, a torch is lit. But since the prisoners are bound, they cannot see behind them and are thus unaware of the torch's existence. Between the torch and the prisoners stands a partition, and behind this partition is a passageway. Along this passage, figures made of wood or stone, representing humans or animals, are carried, held like puppets or marionettes, so that their heads appear above the partition as they move along. As these figures move, their shadows are cast onto the wall that the prisoners are facing due to the torchlight behind them. Because the prisoners can only see these shadows, they come to believe that the shadowy world on the cave wall is the true reality. That's the general story. And there's more to it. It goes like this. One day, a liberator appears, determined to forcibly lead one of the prisoners out of the cave. Freed by this liberator, the prisoner is finally able to turn around and see behind him, since there is no more ropes that was bounding him. And he realizes, oh, so that's what it was. Discovering that what he once believed to be the truth was merely shadows cast by the torchlight. Eventually, the prisoner is brought all the way outside the cave, where he beholds the sun shining brightly in the sky. At first, the brightness blinds him, and he cannot see anything. But as his eyes gradually adjust, he comes to understand that the sun is the source illuminating everything, the force that sustains the entire world. He probably thinks, this is awesome. Filled with this realization, the prisoner returns to the cave to share the truth with his fellow prisoners. But the others refuse to believe his story. Some even declare they don't want to hear such things, and a few even try to kill him. That's essentially how the story goes. In Plato's Allegory of the Cave, the prisoners represent uneducated individuals who, in his view, have no desire to pursue philosophy. The cave wall symbolizes the world as perceived by these uneducated people. In contrast, the liberator in his story signifies the philosopher. The world outside the cave, which the liberated prisoner comes to see, represents the true world of ideas, the world of genuine reality that Plato refers to as the realm of the truth. In Plato's philosophy, the intellect that perceives the world of ideas, corresponds to Nous. Nous can be described as the intellect that discerns ideas. So, if we apply Anaxagoras' concept, which I discussed in the previous presentation, to the allegory of the cave, then for the prisoners confined to the shadowy world on the cave wall, the world remains in a state of unstructured chaos. In such a state, the orderly world of cosmos has not yet begun to unfold. What does this mean? For instance, we, modern people, likely understand the physical laws that govern nature as discoveries of cosmic order. However, if, as Plato suggests, this physical world is merely like shadows cast on the cave wall, then any physical law found in nature will be an order within this shadow world and could not be called the true order of the realm of being. In other words, the physical laws we observe in nature today might also be just one manifestation of a chaotic cosmos active within the arche, or origin, of the world. This means that the true cosmos, as physis, has yet to truly begin. Now, on the other hand, Aristotle, who was a disciple of Plato, emphasized the sensory world, the earthy realm of phenomena, quite the opposite of Plato. Of course, Aristotle did not outright deny Plato's world of ideas. However, being perhaps more adept at logical reasoning than Plato, he likely found Plato's concept of the ideas too vague to accept. In fact, Aristotle criticized Plato's ideas as being little more than poetic metaphors, lacking concrete factual grounding. For example, he questioned how earthly concrete objects could participate in the ideas, and conversely, how the ideas once participated in could manifest themselves in each individual object. To Aristotle, Plato's explanations seemed unsatisfactory and left these points completely unexplained. Thus, despite being Plato's disciple, Aristotle ultimately came to emphasize an empirical perspective focused on the world of phenomena, following his critique of Plato's theory of ideas. This opposition between Plato and Aristotle, whether to regard the world of ideas as essential or the world of phenomena as essential, would become a profound divide in the history of Western philosophy, manifesting as a clash between idealism and realism. Haven't you met people asking, "Do you believe in God?" or "Do you believe in science?" Well, that's another story though. Religion versus science, mind versus matter, subjectivity versus objectivity, are all rooted in this philosophical divide between Plato and Aristotle. Now we come to Heidegger. Heidegger believed it was necessary to put an end to the trajectory of Western philosophical history, as symbolized by the opposition between Plato and Aristotle. In his view, the history of Western philosophy had been preoccupied with debating which was essential, the world of ideas or the world of reality. To Heidegger, this was merely a thought exercise on the superiority of essentia, the essential being. A pattern of thought remained unchanged in modern philosophy from Descartes, Kant to Nietzsche. For Heidegger, both the ideal and the real still fell within the category of real existence, Sein. These were merely entities. Thus, they were not the being, Sein, which brought them into real existence, Sein. This most crucial essence, being, Sein, he argued, had never been considered at all to his date. And this unexamined essence was, for Heidegger, what the ancient Greeks referred to as physis. From this point, Heidegger embarks on a profound inquiry into being as physis, a journey of thought that he pursues throughout his entire life. His philosophy of ontology, which begins with an analysis of human existence, regards human everydayness as something fallen, a state in which the spirit has, in a sense, become thoroughly degraded. In this inauthentic mode of existence, he believes humans fall into nihilism, a frightening concept, implying emptiness. We can imagine humans wandering within this void. Heidegger saw the meaning of existence in the fact that humans always live in relation with others. He connected this sense of communality with the concept of a people or nation, believing that each individual life could only overcome nihilism by finding salvation in the shared identity of their people. And furthermore, he asserted that the realization of being occurs within the state, ultimately transforming his philosophy into something with utter fascist overtones. From the perspective of Noosology's vision of being, it feels like Heidegger's thoughts on existence missed the mark quite severely. And honestly, I struggle to follow his logic here. How could a philosophy originally aiming for a return to physis as primal nature end up oriented towards something so deeply human, nation and state, which in some sense stands in stark contrast to nature itself? Of course, I acknowledge that the political situation in Germany during Heidegger's time had a significant impact on him. However, I suspect there's another factor at play here. Perhaps an unconditional belief in philosophy itself, or an overconfidence in philosophy common among philosophers. In his work on the essence of truth, from Wesen der Wahrheit, Heidegger himself states the following. I have a copy here, so let me read it to you. In brief, a philosopher is a friend of being. Therefore, if philosophy is oriented by setting some particular field, be it mathematics, biology, or any other discipline, as its standard, then this is the coarsest of erroneous measures, marking a fundamental lack of understanding of philosophy at its most basic level. While disciplines may arise from the act of philosophizing, it is not necessarily so. A discipline can serve philosophy, yet philosophy does not require this service. It is from philosophy that a discipline gains its foundation, dignity, and legitimacy for the first time. Wow, it must be something. As we just read, I think this isn't limited to Heidegger. Modern or traditional philosophers in general, they tend to dislike relying on empirical sciences to define the content of philosophical thought. Philosophy considers the question of what human thought itself is, and thus it will be contradictory for philosophy to be substantiated by scientific knowledge, which is itself a product of human thought. In other words, philosophy must be practiced within philosophical thought itself, without being influenced by any other form of knowledge. Here, we see a sense of pride unique to philosophers. The belief that philosophy is the most sublime of all disciplines, and that all forms of knowledge must be grounded in philosophy. But is this really true? In today's world, where scientism and computer technology dominate and society is accelerating into digitalization, I'm sure you all know well that philosophy itself is becoming something of an endangered species. Not only Plato, whom we discussed today, but even Heidegger, the philosopher often regarded as the greatest of the 20th century, is now treated as bordering on the occult by many intellectuals. Even those who are widely recognized as philosophers are no exception to this. In today's philosophy studies, where analytical methods from the Anglo-American tradition dominate, it's even doubtful whether Plato's theory of forms is being studied seriously. That's the reality of it. In this era, devoid of philosophy, to revive the concept of physis that was at the heart of Heidegger's philosophy, I feel we need a new, hybrid way of thinking that surpasses scientism, something that is neither purely philosophy nor purely science. I believe Noosology is precisely an attempt to create this entirely new form of thinking. I don't think I exaggerate. Since this may still be unclear, let me briefly introduce the concept of Noosology. The unique aspect of Noosology's approach lies in overlaying the very essence of existence, being, sein, which I have explained so far, onto quantum theory, a field often considered at the forefront of modern science. Unlike conventional physics, it doesn't regard quantum particles merely as physical objects or entities. In other words, it doesn't view them as real existences, sein is. Noosology views the realm of elementary particles studied in quantum mechanics and quantum field theory as shadows on the cave wall, or more accurately, as space-time itself, since our cave is essentially space-time. These particles are seen as projections of a transcendental element that drives our consciousness from behind the scenes. And in understanding this transcendental aspect, as what Heidegger called being, lies the key to returning to physis, something Heidegger himself could not fully achieve. Our very transformation into elementary particles, allowing us to directly penetrate the inner workings of nature, its inherent immanence, is the kind of thought Noosology seeks to cultivate. As I mentioned earlier, metaphysics began with Plato's division of nature into two realms, reality and ideas. If we regard elementary particles as material entities within nature, their spiritual dimension lies in the mathematical concepts that describe them. Presently, the foundation of our understanding of nature is elegantly split into two: elementary particles as material concepts and elementary particles as mathematical ideas. When we consider this perspective, it becomes clear that the very nature of elementary particles, the fundamental building blocks of matter as modern science understands them, encapsulates the fundamental issue of metaphysics, which began with the division of phenomena and ideas. Neither the elementary particle as a material concept, nor the elementary particle as a mathematical idea truly possesses inherent essence. But what if the mathematical concepts describing these particles were reimagined as something internal through entirely new spatial thinking mediated by our own existence? The mathematical concepts handled by physicists in Platonic terms fall under dianoia, indirect cognition. However, if they could be transformed into noesis, direct cognition, what would emerge is something prior to the division between matter and idea, something that transcends this duality. In the context of Heidegger's ontology, this could indeed be understood as being itself. As I mentioned earlier, in an era where AI is advancing at an accelerated pace and humanity finds itself increasingly confined, there may never have been a time when the thinking of physics as primordial nature was more urgently needed. In Heideggerian terms, to initiate a new turning toward another mode of reflection. You could say that Nous, as conceived by Noosology, represents this very different mode of reflection, envisioning entirely new possibilities for thought. In the upcoming research videos, I plan to delve deeper into this alternative mode of reflection, weaving in the perspectives of various philosophers from history, while exploring the spatial concepts of Noosology. Thank you for staying with me through this lengthy discussion. I look forward to seeing you again in the next presentation.